Hello students, my name is Mr. Supanik and you guys are in the Welding and Fabrication program. For today's lesson, we are going to be doing some differentiated instruction. Now, this lesson will actually be a two-part lesson because there is setting up and then there's also operating. The setup is going to be the same for all students. Some may need the setup to be done completely twice or maybe even 3 times, and some students may only need to do this one before they're allowed to move on. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do some identification of our stuff. Okay, we have 2 different sets of regulators here. Okay, we're going to talk about this first regulator. This first regulator, both of them are actually what's called a 2-stage pressure regulator. What that does is it takes the high pressure and turns it into low pressure. So for this regulator, this is called an acetylene regulator. Now, the reason this is acetylene and the reason this is fuel gas, if you were to take a look at these 2 gauges right here, okay? The gauge closest right here, this is going to be called your tank pressure gauge. The gauge that is closest to the line here is going to be called your line pressure gauge. Now, one way of identifying that this is acetylene, which is your fuel gas, take a look at our gauge. Once we reach 15 psi, that actually goes into the red. Acetylene starts to become unstable and very dangerous once it exceeds 15 psi. This gauge, all it does is simply tells you how much pressure is left in the tank. Okay, 2 gauges. Now, the next thing that we have here, this is our flashback arrestor. This helps prevent any flashback from going into your tank. And this is actually a left-handed thread. So that means that you need to loosen it in order to tighten it, okay? The next one that we have, this is our oxygen regulator. For Oxyfuel setup, you need a mixture of oxygen and a fuel gas. For our particular gas today, that is going to be acetylene. Now, same thing we have. We have 2 gauges here. We have our tank pressure gauge for oxygen. We have our line pressure gauge for oxygen, okay? We still have our flash arrestor right here. This is right-handed thread, so that means that in order to tighten it, we just simply turn it to the right. Now, a full oxygen bottle, this bottle here, has about 2,200 pounds of pressure in it, okay? So these bottles, without these regulators or even with these regulators on, can be very, very dangerous. Our acetylene, on the other hand, there's not as much pressure. There's about 225 to 250 pounds of pressure in this, but the acetylene is a flammable gas, so that means that it could explode if not used correctly. So we have to make sure that we take all the precautions like our flash arrestor, okay? The next thing that we have right here, this is called a pressure screw. This screw does remove, okay? And it also goes right back in here. Now, the sole purpose of this screw, we're taking our tank pressure gauge and we are creating a line pressure gauge. So the more I screw this pressure screw in, the more pressure I'm going to give in my line. Now, operating pressure for acetylene is between 3 and 5 pounds of pressure. Operating pressure for oxygen is starting at about 30 pounds. Now, that number is going to fluctuate depending on the torch, the tip size, and also the thickness of the material that you're cutting. So this pressure screw will be going in or out depending on one of those 3 things. For acetylene, 3 to 5 pounds for most cases is a good number to be on. Oxygen, a good starting pressure is 30 psi. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these regulators and we're going to put them on the torches right behind me. After we put them on the torches, we're going to go ahead and check for leaks. If there's no leaks, then we're going to go ahead and light it. We are then, after we light it, we're going to go through and check for our 3 different types of flames. The first flame is your oxidizing flame, okay? And I will show you exactly what that is. Oxidizing flame means we have too much oxygen pressure. We need to release some of that pressure. Second flame that we have is called our neutral flame. We have the correct mixture of oxygen and acetylene. The third one that we have is our carburizing flame. which means we need to add more oxygen pressure, okay? Now, when we put these on here, our acetylene regulator, hold it with one hand, and we are going to screw it in with the other. You're going to screw it down until it gets tightened. And then right here, I have what's called a crescent wrench or an adjustable wrench. We're going to take this wrench, and we're going to adjust that, we're going to tighten it up. Next thing we have here is our oxygen regulator. Same thing with our oxygen regulator. We're going to use one hand, we're going to put it on here, use the other hand, and we're going to tighten it up. It's very important to make sure that these get tightened up all of the way, and we are going to be checking for leaks. After you tighten this up, use one hand here. You can use the palm of your hand right here. Okay. Okay, so now that we have our regulators put on, the next step is to attach our hoses. Now, in order to put the correct hose on, your green hose goes with your oxygen, your red hose goes with your fuel gas. There are two sides of this. So we have one side of our hoses here that will be connected to our tanks. And then we have the other side here that will be connected to our torch. These are very simple and easy to put on. You're going to take your oxygen hose, use two hands as well. We're going to screw this on until it doesn't go on any farther. And then we're going to go back to that adjustable wrench here, and we are going to just snug that up a little bit. Okay? For our acetylene, it's going to be a little bit different. Our acetylene is, remember, the left-handed threads. So that means in order to tighten this, we have to actually loosen it on. So we're going to take this here, we're going to take these, and we are going to loosen these threads on. Take our wrench, and we are going to put it on there and just snug it up here. Okay? The next thing that we have here, this is called our cutting torch. Now there are a couple of different things on this cutting torch that we need to go over. Okay? First, we have our cutting tip. Okay? The size of this tip is what determines the pressures that are in your oxygen and your acetylene. If you don't have the right pressures here, you're not going to get a very good cut. Okay? The entire thing is called our torch. This is our trigger. Okay? This is what sends a burst of oxygen in through the line and actually cuts the material once it's at its liquefied temperature. This is our oxygen valve. This is our acetylene valve. So our acetylene, or our fuel gas, is going to be connected here. Our oxygen will be connected here. Now, if you forget, that's quite all right. On here, this is an F, very difficult to see. F stands for fuel gas. And then your oxygen says oxygen right here on this particular torch. So, we're going to come over here. We're going to grab these in our acetylene. Same way as putting it onto the regulator here. We're going to use our left-handed threads, tighten that on there. And then we're going to do the same thing with our oxygen with our right-handed threads. Get this tightened up here. Okay, now that we have our torches set up, okay, we have this on here. We have our torches set up here. Here's what our regulators look like. Our acetylene regulator. Now we are going to be getting this lit. So step one of this is to open your oxygen valve. So you always want to open this valve slowly. And then you always open your oxygen up all of the way. There is like a 2-valve system within here because of the high pressure. So if you don't open this up all the way, you will get an inaccurate reading on your gauges. You're not going to get all that pressure through there. Now our fuel gas, we only want to open this up 1 full turn to 1.5 turns. Now the reason being is if there would happen to be an emergency where something in the lines where there was a leak and it caught fire, then you want to be able to quickly turn your fuel gas off. After we get both of those off, we're going to take our pressure screws and we're going to adjust to that 30 psi that we just talked about. So on our line pressure gauge, we're going to squeeze this until it reaches 30 psi. Our acetylene, we're going to move up to about 5 psi. Okay? Next step, we're going to check for leaks. Is go to each location where there is a connection. We're going to put a little bit of this detergent on here, and this is simply just water and soda mixed together. That's all it is. No leaks there, no leaks up here. That means that we are ready to light. The next thing we're going to do is make sure that there's nothing in our area here. And we are going to set up our 3 different types of flames. Okay? Flame number 1, this is going to be our oxidizing flame. We'll go with an oxidizing flame first. Very simple. Okay? All you have to do is open your fuel gas very slightly. And we're going to take this spark lighter here, and we're actually just going to push down on it. Okay? This is called an acetylene flame. This is simply just your acetylene burning. Okay? Next thing we're going to do, we're going to start to slowly add oxygen. Now, notice how our oxygen is hissing at us, and these flames right here are very, very pointy and very bright. This tells me that I have way too much oxygen pressure. I need to back that pressure down a little bit. So we're going to come to our oxygen. We're going to back that pressure off ever so slightly. Now, we have a real bright blue preheat hole. Okay? It's not hissing at us anymore. This is what's called a neutral flame. This is the correct mixture of oxygen and your acetylene gas. Now, if I were to take away a little bit too much oxygen pressure, there becomes a real big flicker here. Okay? That flicker is called a carburizing flame. Okay? So that tells me that I need to add a little bit more oxygen pressure to this in order to have the correct flame. Now this flame here is burning at about 5,800 degrees. Our neutral flame is burning at about 6,000 degrees. And then our oxidizing flame is burning at about 6,300 degrees. Okay? Go ahead and put that back to our neutral flame. Now, in order to shut this off, you always want to get rid of your fuel gas first. So we just close it. Second step, you always want to make sure you're shutting off your oxygen. Okay? Now, one of the reasons why we shut off our acetylene first, we could have what's called a flashback. And that flashback could go down through here or a backfire. And if there's no flash arresters on here, you know, that could be some serious concern for the torches and the people that are in the shop. Now, in order to tear this down, there are a few specific steps that have to be taken. Step number 1, we have to close the valves. Take our acetylene, we're going to close that one. Step number 2, we need to release the pressure out of these lines. Take our oxygen, open our valve, wait till both of our gauges reach 0, close the valve. Same thing with our acetylene. Let them both reach 0, close our valve. Take our pressure screw. We're going to back this pressure screw off until it spins freely. Same thing with your acetylene. Now your torches are ready to be torn back down to let the next person set this up. Now, if you are somebody who's more advanced, we're going to take these torches after we set them up, and we're going to start performing what's called straight cutting operations. We're going to start performing bevel cutting operations, and we're going to perform piercing operations on steel. Now, like I said, these torches melt or burn at about 5,800 to 6,300 degrees. The steel that you're going to be cutting on melts at about 2,000 degrees, so 1,800 to 2,200 degrees. So this burns about 3 times hotter, so it's not going to take very long to preheat that material. But you have to preheat that material first before you can actually start cutting it. And we'll learn about that in the next one. Thank you.